people I think sometimes are like, oh, I have to go out and like change part of the world or, go do some huge thing. And it's like, of course, that's cool. That's great and awesome aspirations. But at the same time, you could change one person's world.
Welcome to Let's Give a Damn. I'm Nick Lapara, and this is my chance to talk with people who saw something wrong that needed to be made right, and they gave a damn about it. Brett Hagler is a remarkable young man and leader. At the young age of 26, he and his team of co-founders, who are all under the age of 30, are changing the world by building homes in impoverished places in a truly innovative way. I loved hearing and learning from Brett. You'll also hear about what they're doing to help Haiti recover from the recent Hurricane Matthew, who left over 60,000 people homeless. Without further ado, let's get right into the show. We have Brett on the line this morning. Brett, how are you?
I am doing well. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic. I'm on the East Coast, so it's 11 a.m. You're on the West Coast, 8 a.m., so thanks for doing this so early.
Happy to do it. I'm really excited about the kind of vision for this podcast, so thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we don't have a ton of time. You've got a TV interview after this, and so let's jump right into the interview. Let's start from the beginning. I'd love for you to share your story with us. I want to hear as much of it as you're willing to tell, because I believe that hearing some of your story, how you were brought up, what were things that influenced you early on, will help me and the Let's Give a Damn family connect some dots as we hear how you grew up and then how you chose to pursue some of the things you've pursued. So share for a few minutes a little bit about your upbringing and your story.
Yeah, so for context, I will share like exactly what I'm doing now, because it's like totally different than what I thought I would be doing. So right now I'm the CEO of News Story, which is a nonprofit that crowdfunds and builds houses for about $6,000 per home in the developing world. And we also transform slum areas into new communities or villages. So that's what I'm doing now, which is about a 180 than what I thought I would be doing 5 years ago. So with that preface, my background is grew up in South Florida, super lucky to be born into an awesome family, great parents, had everything that I could, possibly ask for. I really hit the lottery, especially with the context I have now of the developing world. Didn't really understand that though. And so I grew up, and in high school, I kind of, was your stereotypical jock, and I really cared about sports, girls, and, of course, being the most popular guy, right? So
that
was my life. And then when I was a senior, I got diagnosed with a extremely rare form of cancer out of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
And it was a huge, really the first adversity in my life that was significant. And so I battled that through about a year. And good news is that I'm all good now. And there were some small little miracles that happened, but I'm good now. And after that, the story people might think is, oh, well, he got over cancer and he like changed his life and became like this super generous, like selfless guy that wants to change other people's lives. That's not the case. I actually kind of went the opposite way. So I thought, man, you only get one life. You don't know when it's going to end, right? And I want to go make the most of life. And to me, that was trying to go out and have as much fun as I could, get as much for myself as I possibly could. I call it the 3 Gs. It was girls, gold, and glory. And all through college, that was my goal. And then a little after college, that was my goal as well. Now, I was always a very ambitious person, but it was always what I call selfish ambition. So, could I become the president of the fraternity? Why? So it looks good for me, right? Could I have the top internships? Why? Because it looks good for me. All these different things, top, prettiest girls, all that stuff, just to try to fill myself up. And turns out I was able to achieve most of those things. And at the end of the day, it was just like, okay, is this all there is, right? There has to be a bigger purpose than this. And so life goes on a little bit, and a couple years out of college, which was in 2013, I made a huge 180 in my life, basically revived a lost Christian faith that transformed my heart. All my friends thought I went off the deep end or something just because it was such a different life. But I was just over living for myself and having only selfish ambition. And I was just very fortunate to stumble upon a couple leaders that I really, really looked up to that happened to be, believers and men of faith. And I just wanted to be like that because of how they acted, their integrity, what they had achieved, their family, what they stood for. They had a bigger purpose in their life. They had more joy. They had more fire. And that's what I wanted. And so I made that change. And then after that, I was kind of in the middle of actually had a for-profit startup. So I was always entrepreneurial, but it was a for-profit startup. And then I took a trip down to Haiti. And as mentioned, like I didn't grow up thinking I was going to do any of this stuff. And so I never went on mission trips or like saw the developing world. It was just something I saw on TV, you know?
Right, right.
Go down to Haiti in 2013, which was a couple years after the 2010 earthquake. If you guys remember that, just for context, that earthquake killed around 300,000 people. One of the biggest catastrophes of the century, in my opinion. Decimated the entire country. And I was down there like almost 4 years after the earthquake, but yet it looked like it was only 4 months after the earthquake. Wow. And so we got to go see kids that were living in these temporary tents that were given to them after the earthquake for immediate aid, right? Which is necessary at the time. But they had been living in them for 4 years now. And then as of today, it's been almost 7 years and people are still living in these tents. Wow. And so I got to see this problem firsthand of, wow, if there's this little girl who, the first one I met, her name was Sashu, she's about 5 years old. I got to think, well, at night when she goes to bed, there's no safety, there's no protection. So any intruders, any storms, like she's prone to danger, right? And then I got to understand, like, well, if it rains at night, that means mud and sewage rushes through the floor. And the kids who usually sleep on the floor, that means they have to stand up the whole night. And it's just like, man, I'll kind of spare details, but I understood how important safety and shelter was, which is one of life's basic needs. And then that was the first problem that we wanted to solve. The second problem was really like why I wanted to start a news story instead of just giving to another organization. And the second problem was in my opinion, kind of the status quo of traditional aid and a lack of transparency in the giving system. So for those listening, I'm sure you've given to larger organizations. And if you give $1,000, you don't know where that money goes. You don't know what percentage goes, and you don't know the end result of the donation. And so when I got back from Haiti, like I was trying to tell people about this story and they were like, dude, you can't trust it down there. Like corruption, you don't know where your money goes, black hole, all this stuff. And I'm like, you're kind of right. And statistically, about roughly 43% of people don't trust charity. They would say they don't really trust charity. So I'm like, man, that is a huge issue. And so ultimately wanted to start a news story to solve two problems. The first, life-threatening homelessness. Two, the kind of status quo of the traditional aid model. And that's how we came up with News Story with a very simple concept that I won't go into details. But it's one, we show people exactly who they're helping. So we create digital family profiles that if you're in New York, we connect you with a family in Haiti or in El Salvador digitally through a crowdfunding page. The second thing is that 100% of the donations goes to exactly who you see. And the third thing is video proof for every family that moves into their new house. So we launched that about 2 years ago in November of 2014. And then we got into a program called Y Combinator, which is kind of like a startup accelerator program in Silicon Valley. Same one that produced Airbnb and Dropbox. And it's kind of been a story of growth ever since then. We've now done about 630 houses. Each house is only $6,000 per home. And that's building about 6 different communities in 3 countries in the last 23 months.
That's crazy. Thanks for sharing that story. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk about, were there, and you shared a couple of them, but I guess what I'm trying to communicate here is, was there a specific moment or a circumstance in your life? Was there a pivotal moment where you began giving a damn, or was it more a series of moments or circumstances?
I think it was well, I mean, the biggest moment for me was reviving a Christian faith.
Okay.
I mean, that was absolutely like the pivotal moment. Everything changed. Like my heart was transformed. I started caring about, totally different things than I ever had before. So that was a pivotal moment, but obviously it doesn't happen for everybody. And I'm sure people
Right.
listening that's not the case. But up until that, I just kept thinking like, man, there's got to be like a bigger purpose. It can't just be about myself and wanting to look the best and have all this stuff. And so I started to give a damn about, well, what would it look like to take some of those talents and those skills and apply them to other things that could actually help other people and actually like help change people's lives. And once I started to get a little taste of that, I saw like the black and white difference it made in other people's lives.
Yeah.
But then I also felt how it made me feel, right? Which was so much more fulfilling than all of the other things that I used to be doing. And, one of my kind of favorite little mottos is that you have to pour yourself out in order to fill yourself up.
Mm.
And before, I was doing the exact opposite. So to answer your question, once I started pouring myself out, like kind of more and more, it was like, wow, this is how you actually fill yourself up. And I just kind of became on fire to do that.
That's awesome. That makes total sense. I'm sure, Brett, that your journey has not been easy. So tell me about one or two or three hardships. Tell me about the ups and downs, because here's what I want to learn from you and communicate to the listeners. There's a certain sexiness about, starting to contribute and starting to give back, and we get to go overseas and, take videos and, show us holding some kid in, Nigeria, and and all the while the Sigaros is playing in the background of the soundtrack of our lives, right? And that's just not the reality of it, right? Like, sure, there are moments that feel really good, and it's great to feel those when we can contribute and give back. But
Yeah.
just to be helpful to the Let's Give a Damn family as they have their give a damn moment and decide to start giving back and being the change they wish to see in the world, give us some context about some hardships that you've had, some ups and downs.
Absolutely. And when I was kind of given the story in the beginning, that's all kind of the highlights, right? It's a
Right.
short version of highlights, and you can't just look at that. Whether you're looking at any entrepreneur and you see like, oh, this is what like their company has accomplished or whatever, or an author that writes a book, like blah blah blah. I mean, those are just the highlights. Nobody sees the tough times and what you're doing in the dark when nobody's there. So before I answer the question, I just want to say like the first thing I would recommend is to, think big about what you want to do and what you want, to give back and give a damn about, but then like start super small, because, people I think sometimes are like, oh, I have to go out and like change part of the world or, go do some huge thing. And it's like, of course, that's cool. That's great and awesome aspirations. But at the same time, you could change one person's world, right? Or you could change one family's world. And I always think that's a fantastic place to start. And that's exactly how we started. We started with trying to crowdfund one house for one widow in Haiti. That was it.
Wow.
It was like that was the focus. And it wasn't, hey, we're going to try to go out and change the world and build 1,000 communities. Like it wasn't that. It was like, hey, let's try to crowdfund one house for one widow. And so my challenge to people listening is, what could be your first house or your first little thing that you're trying to go do, and that you're just every morning you're thinking about it and you're just going to make it happen. You're gonna force that into being, and then you just got to understand that it's all about like it's the hard that makes it great, right? It's the
Yeah,
hard things
totally.
that you're willing to go through and that you're willing to do. That's what's actually going to make things happen. Because if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? It's going to be hard, and you just have to build this appetite to where you want the hard stuff, right? Like you want like the struggle is going to come, and you just have to understand that's part of the process and that's part of the journey. But ultimately, like the journey is the reward. And so when things are going tough, and like that's expected, that's when you know that you're in the arena and that you are doing something worth pursuing and that you're giving a damn. Because most people, they'll say, sure, I want to go give a damn. But then when, it actually is time to do that,
Right.
They'll kind of back off.
Right. Yeah, that's huge, I think, for everyone to hear, to really get that, because there is, I think, a desire in most people. Like when they see these videos or hear these stories, they want to go do something themselves. But then when they start to do it and they feel pressure for the first time, or they feel pressure the second time, or early on in their journey, they give up because it is hard and it isn't sexy and easy. And they decide, you know what, it's just easier and more comfortable for me to go back to my old way of living, where it was just, me having my 9 to 5, binge watching the newest Netflix show at night, and then going back and doing it again the next day. So I think that's hugely important. From your experience, any more practical steps that you can give to the listeners on how they can begin to, you gave 1 or 2 there, any more in your experience? Because I think some people are going to listen to this podcast because, they saw it on social media or somebody told them about it, and they just want to hear a really good story. And that's great. But I suspect that the majority of people listening want to go out, and they already give a damn. They've got that thing inside of them, and they want to go out and do something about it. They want to help their fellow man, fellow woman. So are there any more? You're a young guy. Like, I think when most people, if they were to Google the word CEO and they pushed on images, a gray-haired man in a suit is going to pop up more than likely. And we're in this new age and era where how old are you, Brett?
27.
Yeah, 27, CEO of a startup charity. I think this is really fantastic and something that people are going to look at and say, "Ooh, I want that." So any more practical steps you can give to the listeners on how they can be? You already gave one that was really amazing, which is just start small. Totally. Like just start with one. We started with one house. That's super practical. Any more like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, it's all choice, right? If it's all choice, and everybody has the power to decide, I want to make this choice or this choice. So at night, do I want to watch Netflix for 2 hours? Do I want to go play in the softball game? Or do I want to sit there and work on my blog, right? Or work on whatever it is that you're trying to just get a little bit off the ground, or to give a damn a little bit about. It's like you have to put in the time and you have to make sacrifices. So you have to change the comfortable lifestyle, right? It's like what we're doing, the pursuits that we're trying to make, it's unique, it's abnormal. It's not the status quo of what normal people do, right? So you have to be comfortable and like love the fact that what you're getting into is not quote unquote normal, right? You're not going to have the same type of week as everybody else. You're going to be doing things differently, right? You might be waking up at 5 a.m. to get in 2 to 3 hours of work in the morning because you're trying to do something on the side, right? Or you might at night, you might be, working on this instead of, like I mentioned, like, going to movies or, going out to eat 5 nights a week, right? So the first thing is that you've got to make the choice to do things differently. The second thing is that you have to start small, and you have to be vulnerable. Like the first thing that whatever it is that you're making or you're trying to ship, whether it's trying to acquire your first 100 blog subscribers, whether it's your first 100 podcast subscribers, right? Whether it's the first kid you're trying to sponsor, right? Whatever that thing is, like you just have to figure out in the beginning how to make it happen, and do, like we say do things that don't scale. And what that means, it's very counterintuitive, because a lot of people think like, oh, I've got to come up with like this massive plan that, operationally it'll work and it'll scale and like all this stuff. And it's like, no, in the beginning, actually you have to do really manual, like crazy sounding things just to get your first whatever it is. So pick a one first goal that you can strive towards. In our case, it was one house, right, which was $6,000. And then you reverse engineer like very manual, like crazy things that you would have to do, right, in order to just get that first goal, whatever it is. If it was 100 podcast subscribers, maybe you're talking to people on the street, like you're doing what, like literally whatever it takes. You have to have that level of determination. And the last thing I'll say is that that's all choice. That's the beautiful thing about creating something, about entrepreneurship, about, you mentioned being a CEO at a young age. How am I a CEO at a young age? How are, all of our co-founders are 27 and under. Like, how is that? Because we decided that we wanted to be, and we went out and just did it. There's no rocket science here. It's the last thing I'll say, like literally my favorite quote of all time is from Nike, and it's just do it. Like there's no excuses. You want to do something, awesome, do it.
Right. Solid. Let's give a damn family. Brett just dropped some serious wisdom on you. Brett, you're wise beyond your years, and I'm grateful for that. Thanks for sharing some of those things.
Let me say something on that note real quick.
Sure.
I appreciate that, but the reason that I think I have, I don't know, maybe gotten a little smarter, or a little bit, so-called wisdom is definitely not the right word, but the reason that I've learned some stuff over the last couple of years is because I am constantly trying to learn, right? Yep. Like, how do you learn stuff? How do you draw examples and models in your head? Oh, maybe it's because you listen to a book every week, or you listen to a podcast every day, right? And over time, that compounds, and that makes you quote unquote wise, even though what you're really doing is you're just having the discipline to learn new stuff every day. Right. Yep. And so those daily habits over time, when you do them for years, like, as you know, those add up. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this person knows stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, maybe, but it's just because all we've done is just we've put in time, and we like want to learn. And over time, there's this little example I like to use. It's like, when you read books, you listen to podcasts, whatever it is that you're trying to learn, like obviously you don't remember every single thing that you listen to or read, right? It's just like if you stick your hand into a tub of glue, right? So imagine putting yourself in a tub of glue. When you pull your hand out, you don't take all the glue with you, right? But some sticks.
Yep.
And so what I like to think is, if you're investing time into learning, stuff is going to stick. And over time that compounds. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this person knows stuff, Yeah,
that's great. That's great. It's all about what we're consuming, the content we're putting in, the things we're absorbing. That, like you said, it totally matters, and that will eventually come out. So in other words, listeners, if you are just every night binge watching the next show, or spending all your time fighting on social media, or this, that, or the other, like that's what's going to consume your life, and that's what's going to influence and dictate what you do next. Whether that's watch more TV or go out there and be a world changer. So great stuff. Great stuff. You mentioned a few minutes back about all the founders being 27 and under. First of all, that's amazing. Second of all, tell me about the team that makes New Story Charity happen.
Yeah, so it all starts with our co-founders, which is me, Matthew, Alexandria, and Michael. How it kind of happened was, one of the co-founders I kind of grew up with, which is Michael. And so when I first had the idea for New Story, he was like the first person that I texted, because we actually started the company together before this. So the first person I knew, and it just kind of made sense to talk to. But then how I met Matthew and Alexandria is really cool, because I think it's how a lot of the listeners can meet other like-minded people. So I met Matthew, who now is our head of product and does all of our kind of user experience and a lot of the technology. I met him by going to a dinner of I don't know what it was called. It was something like social entrepreneur minded, whatever. And it was just like, oh, I'm interested in that. And so I showed up and I went, right? Because I was trying to meet other people like that and trying to learn. Met Matthew. Turns out that Matthew had just left a really big consulting firm, and he started his own startup user experience like web design agency. And so he started it, and like we met. And then when I had the concept for a news story, I was like, oh, I'll call Matthew because I know he's like really good and he can help build the first, like we call it MVP, which is a minimum viable product of what News Story was. And so that's how I met Matthew, and he built the very first version. And then about a month in, it was like, wow, this guy's amazing. Like, I want to ask him to be a co-founder. So that's how I met Matthew. And then how I met Alexandria, who is just absolutely incredible. She's our COO, is Matthew was hosting. Now he was hosting a social entrepreneurship meetup club where they met. It wasn't a dinner. It was like more of a little bigger than a dinner. Met like once a month of like-minded people in Atlanta. He asked me to share like news story, and this was like a month in. And Alexandria happened to show up and be there, and she heard like what was going on, and it turns out that her background actually resonates a lot with like the homelessness issue that we're solving for, because she did Teach for America, which is an extraordinary program, and she taught kids that sometimes were homeless, and she could see like, you know, obviously what their achievement was like if they weren't in a house.
Right.
So long story short, that's how I met Alexandria. You know, she kind of works on a couple small projects, and then I'm like, wow, this girl is absolutely amazing. It'd be an honor to bring her on as a co-founder. And that's how we started. So I think the lesson in that is, you know, put yourself in serendipitous like opportunities.
Yep.
How do you do that? You make the choice to go to things where you can meet people, or you could be around like-minded people, right? Like you're not going to do that if, like I mentioned, you're playing in, you know, the softball game every night, or you know, you're just doing stuff where you're not putting yourself in those opportunities.
Yeah.
So the other team members, we now have 7 team members, and the other ones we met actually in a pretty serendipitous way as well. Just kind of being around the right places, talking about, you know, what you're doing, kind of your vision for things, and you'll see that some people latch on to that and they'll stand out. And when you know, like when you feel something about someone that there's something different here, you should just follow your intuition and you should pursue, you know, whatever that is with them. And that's really how we got brought on the other team members.
That's awesome. Sounds like quite the team. I want to meet them all someday. So you guys are in Silicon Valley, which is a place where it's not typically thought of as a place where you find people, you know, being very generous with their money and their time. You know, it's a place where you're building businesses and, you know, businesses that are answering to shareholders, and you've got money and venture and angel and this and that. And it just seems like a place where you wouldn't find what News Story Charity is doing. So how is it running News Story Charity out of a place like that? Are you guys finding like Affirmation, pushback? What's it like being in that environment?
Yeah, it's actually been the perfect ecosystem for us.
Nice.
And the reason that is because, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're trying to solve 2 problems. The second problem is like the status quo of the traditional charity model. And that resonates with a lot of people out here, right? Because the people in Silicon Valley, what are we doing? We're waking up every day and we're trying to innovate. We're trying to disrupt traditional models. We're trying to, you know, move forward and advance and think big, all those things. And that's real. And so our whole positioning has been, look, we're doing the same thing, but in the nonprofit sector, right? We're using technology. We're approaching this with a different mindset of saying there has to be more technology and more transparency in the nonprofit model. Does that resonate with you? And they're all like, yeah, totally. So what we've found, Nick, is that we've unlocked a lot of donors that in the past have had some skepticism or just didn't really trust, you know, like traditional charities. And I don't blame them. And so we found that it's not that people don't want to help other people. They just don't know really who to trust or where to go. And so they're just kind of like, you know, I'm not going to do it. But if you can give them a model they can believe in and they can trust and that it resonates with them, then the story changes. And that's what we've seen out here. And I mean, I'd say over 80% of our funding has probably come from Silicon Valley, with individuals, companies, all those things, because we've just kind of tripled down on that story. And we hope that other nonprofits will do the same, right? Like one of our chief goals is to try to help inspire and spur on other organizations or other co-founders to take a different approach to the nonprofit model. And if we can influence other organizations to kind of adopt some of like what we've been doing, obviously with their own version of it, then we feel like, man, that's awesome. And that's what we're trying to do out here.
Incredible. So great to hear. Brett, as we start to wind down this interview, I have a couple questions left. One is talk about today for New Story Charity. I know, we've all been in the news, like watching the news and keeping up with what's happened in Haiti the last couple weeks with Hurricane Matthew.
Yeah.
So what is I've been following along, and I've been incredibly encouraged in trying to share when I can. So what's happening today with New Story Charity? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, so we're all about. So we started with just trying to basically crowdfund houses and do that in the most transparent way possible. And then as time went on, we started building a lot of houses in the same area. And then we're like, light bulb went off. Whoa, we're creating like villages and like a community, right? And so just imagine in your head, hey, there's 30 acres of land, blank land. We're putting 200 houses on there with over 1,000 people. Well, now that means you can bring a school in, you can bring in microloan opportunities, you can bring in agriculture training. Like you can do all these different things, and that's what we're doing now through partnerships with other organizations. So today, New Story is all about building communities because that's how we feel that it will unlock the most potential in those communities. That's how we feel that it will change societies. So that's what we're focused on. And we've now built in 2 years, we've funded about 630 houses. We've built a little over 300 of those. About 215 of those happen to be built in Haiti. And it really hits close to our heart because unfortunately a couple weeks ago, almost a Category 5 hurricane destroyed like the southern part of Haiti. Over 4,000 homes were just completely wiped out. I mean, that's over 20,000 people. Almost 1,000 people died. Like people don't die like that during hurricanes, but these people didn't really have anywhere to go, right? They didn't have shelter. So two things. One, all of our homes that were built withstood the hurricane just because we really believe in building long-term permanent solutions. And so we architect our homes and all of our infrastructure to be that way. But the second thing is we said, well, we're going to try to rebuild and fund homes for these families that just had had everything destroyed. Because what we do not want to happen is the same cycle that happened during the 2010 earthquake, which was so much temporary aid floods in. People are given tents, which is necessary for a couple months.
Right.
But then what happens? What happens when a girl lives in that tent for 6 years? And we're deeply concerned that that's going to happen again. And so we launched an initiative to basically try to raise as much money as we can, as fast as we can, to try to fund as many of these 4,000 homes that were destroyed as possible. And within about 3 weeks, we have now a little over $800,000. We've got a long way to go. We obviously can't do it all ourselves, but we're trying to construct this narrative that obviously there needs to be short-term solutions, but we cannot forget about long-term solutions. And so we're trying to get other philanthropists, other foundations to kind of get on board with that narrative so that these families are not in survival mode for potentially the next decade.
Right. $800,000 in the last couple of weeks. I mean, that's amazing. And I really hope that you guys, are able to implement that well and build those homes. I think it's really cool going back a couple minutes where you talked about, you guys had that light bulb moment, which I think is incredible, where you guys realized you're actually building new towns, and that's incredible to be able to be a part of that and to be able to do that. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the Let's Give a Damn family that I've failed to ask you, Brett?
No, I would just say that anybody listening, if there is some type of idea on your mind or something that you can't stop thinking about, just pursue it. You don't have to have everything figured out, right? Like you don't have to quit your job and like start doing something, but just keep taking small steps into whatever it is that is convicting you, that is on your heart, and then you'll know when the time is right to put either significantly more time into it or to potentially go full time into it. But just don't ignore that voice, and don't let the resistance like beat you, because the resistance is going to say, yeah, like don't pursue that, like
Right.
just do what everybody else does. You don't need to do that. Like, come on, like grow up. You don't need to do that. And I would just really, really strongly recommend that you push back against that, and that you are an anomaly, and that you do pursue something worth giving a damn about.
That's awesome. I know you've got to go. You've got a TV interview soon. So last question, where can we keep up with you, Brett, with what you're doing and what the New Story charity team is doing?
The URL of New Story is newstorycharity.org, or you can just Google New Story and we'll pop up. I'm relatively active on Twitter, and so my handle is at Brett Hagler, BRETTHAGLER. And so if anybody has any questions, you can just ping me on there and I'll get back to you.
Fantastic. Thanks. And New Story Charity is on social media as New Story Charity, right?
Correct.
Great. Thanks for joining me. This was an honor, and I'm excited to continue watching you create amazing stuff and empower others to give a damn.
Thanks, man. Love the podcast team. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining Brett and I for our conversation today. Be sure to go follow Brett Hagler and New Story Charity everywhere on social media. If you enjoyed our chat, go let them know. Also, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. And ask your friends to listen and subscribe too. The more the merrier, I say. You can follow Let's Give a Damn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to find out more about the show and other things we plan to implement very soon. And head on over to our Facebook page, click on that sign up button to receive weekly emails containing amazing stories just like the one you heard here today. Also, if you want, you can follow me at Nick Lapara on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat. Well, that's all for today, friends. I cannot wait to spend more time with you soon. And I urge you, even today, to begin giving a damn about the things around you that are wrong that you have the ability to help make right. Until next time.